Move it. Kyle Mercer snapped, his hand shoving hard against Maya Bennett's shoulder as she reached for her bin. What if the woman he shoved in front of hundreds was the very one who could shut the entire lane down? The sound wasn't loud, but it carried. A gasp from the people nearest. The scrape of her shoes against the rubber mat. Maya caught herself before stumbling, her face calm though her chest tightened. Around her, passengers froze mid-step. The rhythm of belts clattering into trays suddenly suspended. Phones tilted upward. A teenager whispered, "Did he just push her?" While Lena Ortiz, already recording, zoomed in. Fluorescent lights hummed above, loud in the new silence. Even the PA announcing "Final call for Flight 299" sounded muffled against the stillness here. Kyle folded his arms, jaw set like stone, daring her to object. Maya straightened slowly, lifting her chin. The scanner's red light blinked stubbornly, refusing to turn green, bathing her in its warning glow. The air tightened as Kyle gestured her aside again, daring the crowd to watch what came next. Maya Bennett was not the kind of traveler anyone would notice in a crowd. A navy blazer folded neatly over her arm, flats chosen for comfort, and a tote balanced against her side. She looked like any professional returning from a week away. Nothing loud, nothing out of place, yet the shove had turned her into the center of a scene no one could look away from. Her posture stayed calm, her breathing steady, but her eyes traced the room in quiet calculation. She saw the supervisor, Donna Price, hovering by the podium, arms crossed like a shield. She caught Mr. Hutchins, the elderly man in line behind her, his brow knit in sympathy as he muttered something no one else could hear. And she noticed Lena Ortiz, phone angled higher now, framing everything. Kyle loomed at the edge of her vision, waiting for her to stumble or argue. Maya gave him neither. She set her tote back onto the belt with deliberate care, as if reclaiming her right to the space he had taken. The scanner beeped again. One sharp, shrill refusal, and the sound spread across the checkpoint like a verdict no one wanted to read aloud. The silence didn't last long. It broke in fragments. A cough, the shuffle of feet, a whisper that slipped out sharper than intended. Passengers craned their necks, not toward the checkpoint itself, but toward the glow of screens. Lena Ortiz steadied her phone, thumb adjusting the zoom. A few rows back, another passenger followed her lead, raising their camera just high enough to capture both Maya and the agent who had pushed her. For some, it was entertainment. For others, insurance. The steady red record lights created their own spotlight, harsher than the fluorescent bulbs above. Jamal Pierce, dressed in a tailored suit, exhaled loudly, impatient. "Unbelievable," he muttered, tapping at his watch as if his schedule carried more weight than what had just happened. His complaint rippled, giving cover to those who wanted to dismiss what they saw. Maya remained still, hands folded neatly in front of her. She wasn't silent because she was powerless. She was silent because silence in moments like this made the cruelty louder. From somewhere near the metal detector, a child's voice carried across the lane. "Why did he push her?" the boy asked, his mother tugging at his sleeve. No one answered. Donna Price watched from the podium, arms crossed tight, nails tapping against the sleeve of her jacket. She had seen confrontations at checkpoints before, some that fizzled, and some that left stains on reports for months. This one carried the same weight, but the presence of so many phones made her hesitate. Every angle of her reaction would be captured, dissected, replayed. Kyle Mercer didn't notice her indecision. He leaned on the edge of the table, jaw clenched, posture bristling with authority. His words came sharper now, meant for the bystanders as much as for Maya. "You'll comply, or you'll wait until I'm done." The line sounded rehearsed, the kind of phrase that protects the speaker more than the procedure. Maya inhaled slowly, eyes steady. She didn't give him the argument he was baiting her for. Instead, she adjusted her blazer, smoothing a wrinkle, reclaiming control in the smallest gesture. Donna shifted her weight, eyes darting between Kyle's rigid stance and Maya's composed silence. She knew which side of this moment carried the greater risk, but stepping in would brand her choice forever. Her hand lifted from her elbow, halfway into the air, suspended between restraint and action. The line stretched back into the terminal, passengers shifting from one foot to the other as minutes piled on. Boarding groups were called over the loudspeaker, each announcement landing heavier than the last. Travelers glanced between their watches and the standoff, trapped in a choice they couldn't influence. Maya remained centered in it all. Her tote returned to the belt, her shoes placed carefully into the bin as though nothing were out of order. The deliberate pace unsettled Kyle more than defiance would have. His authority thrived on panic, not patience. Lena's camera caught the moment a businessman muttered about missing his connection, only to fall quiet when Mr. Hutchins reminded him. She didn't ask for this. The words were soft, but they carried. Kyle's jaw worked side to side, fists curling at his sides. The silence wasn't obedience. It was judgment, stretched across every pair of eyes in the lane. His voice cut through it, brittle with irritation. "Step aside again," he snapped, sharp enough to fracture the thin stillness holding the crowd. Maya lifted her chin, her calm refusing to break. The scanner blinked red once more, its glow reflecting off her steady face. The glass-walled enclosure beside the checkpoint was never meant to feel like a prison. But that was exactly how it looked when Kyle gestured Maya inside. The space was narrow, lit by a single strip of harsh fluorescent light, with a metal table at its center and 2 bins stacked against the wall. Travelers who were guided there usually shuffled in quickly, heads down, eager to be cleared and gone. Maya walked with deliberate steps, every movement measured. Kyle filled out an inspection slip with a pen that clicked too loud in the silence. He didn't write quickly. Each pause before the ink touched paper was a performance. Passengers pressed against the stanchions, phones raised higher to see over shoulders. Some whispered accusations, others excuses, as if labeling Maya suspicious would justify their own unease. Mr. Hutchins leaned on his cane, voice low but certain. "She's done nothing wrong." His words barely carried, but a few in the crowd nodded, catching courage from him. Lena kept her camera steady, documenting every angle, her recording now less about curiosity and more about evidence. Maya placed her hands flat on the metal table, not in surrender, but in patience. Her silence wasn't empty, it was strategy. Every second that ticked by without her flinching chipped away at Kyle's control. Kyle tapped the slip against the table, glancing at her with a smirk that dared her to question him. He didn't notice the eyes of the room sharpening, not on Maya, but on him. Kyle leaned on the edge of the table, his shadow stretching across the bins. "Random inspection," he said, pen tapping against the slip. The word random landed heavy, as if he thought repeating it would make it true. Maya's voice was calm, even. "I'd like to know the reason I've been singled out." She didn't raise her tone, but her question carried through the silence like a bell. Passengers shifted, curious. Some faces hardened with quiet agreement. Others rolled their eyes, eager for the delay to end. Kyle gave a dry laugh, loud enough for the crowd. "That's how it works. Some people get checked. Some people don't. Cooperate or we can make this longer." He angled his body so the audience behind the rope could see his smirk, playing to them as much as to her. Donna Price stepped forward, lips pressed thin. "Kyle," she began, but stopped herself, unwilling to challenge him fully. Maya set her tote onto the table with steady hands. "I understand procedures," she said, her words clipped, professional. "And I know what non-compliance actually means." She didn't explain further, didn't need to. From the crowd, Jamal Pierce muttered, "She's holding up the line," giving Kyle the validation he wanted. The comment drew a few nods, passengers latching onto inconvenience as an excuse to ignore injustice. Kyle's grin widened. "Hear that? Even they're tired of waiting." He gestured broadly toward the crowd, pulling them into his side of the performance. But the camera lenses stayed fixed on him, not on her. The tension grew heavy enough that it pulled in reinforcements. A radio crackled near the podium, followed by the steady tread of boots on tile. Officer Reed Allen appeared at the edge of the checkpoint, uniform crisp, one hand resting near his belt. He was young enough to still look uncertain, old enough to understand that moments like these followed you long after the shift ended. The crowd shifted, a ripple of whispers naming him as if his presence alone promised order. Kyle straightened, puffing his chest, suddenly eager to perform for a new audience. "We've got a non-compliant passenger here," he announced, loud enough to fill the space. His phrasing was careful, practiced, the kind that sounded official even when it wasn't true. Reed's eyes moved from Kyle to Maya. She wasn't shouting. She wasn't resisting. She stood steady, hands resting on the table, the picture of composure. His brow tightened, suspicion bending not toward her but toward the way the agent had staged the scene. "Everything all right here?" Reed asked, his tone cautious. Kyle didn't give Maya the chance to answer. "She's refusing inspection. Could be dangerous." The word dangerous carried sharp edges, slicing through the silence to provoke fear. Reed hesitated, scanning the faces in the crowd, the phones that glowed like evidence. His radio hissed again, a dispatcher's voice bleeding through. "Command wants an update." His hand froze on the mic at his shoulder. The next word he chose could tip the room toward order, or ignite something far bigger. Donna moved closer, her voice low enough to avoid carrying. "Kyle, just clear it and move on. We don't need a scene." Her words were quick, clipped, designed more to contain fallout than to deliver fairness. Kyle ignored her. He flipped through Maya's tote, lifting items with exaggerated care, then dropping them harder than necessary. Each thud against the table was meant to echo authority. He rifled through her folders, held up a paperback, shook a toiletry bag as though searching for something hidden inside. Nothing he touched required that level of scrutiny, but performance was the point. Maya stood silent, her posture firm. She didn't flinch when her belongings were mishandled. She didn't raise her voice when Kyle smirked at the lack of contraband. Every second she remained composed, turned his display into something uglier, more obvious. Phones caught everything, the sharp angle of his search, the dismissive way he shoved her items aside, the stillness of her response. In those recordings, the contrast told the story clearer than words could. Donna's hand lingered at her side, torn between restraint and intervention. Her eyes darted to the watching crowd, then to Reed, who still hadn't spoken. The silence pressed heavier than the noise of rolling suitcases beyond the barrier. Kyle leaned closer, his voice low but venomous. "You're not walking through here today unless I say so." The words weren't procedure. They were personal, and everyone watching knew it. Maya's hands moved slowly, each gesture deliberate. She gathered the papers Kyle had scattered, stacking them neatly again. The calmness in her movements cut sharper than any raised voice could. Kyle watched, expecting a protest, a slip in composure, something he could seize. Instead, she reached into the inside pocket of her blazer and withdrew a card-sized credential. She didn't flash it. She didn't wave it like a shield. She simply placed it face down on the metal table, centered perfectly between them. Her gaze never left Kyle's. The air shifted. Donna's eyes caught the edges of the card, and her expression faltered. She didn't need to flip it over to recognize the kind of weight such credentials carried. Reed noticed too, his attention narrowing as though the quiet act had raised the stakes higher than all of Kyle's bluster combined. Kyle, oblivious, gave a crooked smile. "What's this supposed to prove?" His words dripped with mockery, but the crowd leaned forward, curiosity pulling them closer. Phones tilted at sharper angles, lenses zooming in to catch the object on the table. Maya didn't respond. She didn't need to. The silence that followed made the card speak louder than anything she could have said. Kyle's smirk lingered, but his voice cracked slightly as he added, "Won't change a thing." The certainty in his tone was thinner now, fragile under the collective weight of eyes fixed on that small rectangle of authority. The checkpoint had turned into a theater, and the crowd sat captive in its seats. Boarding calls echoed across the concourse. Group B for Flight 412 now departing, each one raising the tension of travelers trapped in line. Every announcement reminded them they were losing time, but none dared leave. Something bigger was unfolding, and they knew it. Kyle tapped the pen against his inspection slip, impatience scribbled across his face. "You're wasting everyone's morning," he said, sweeping his arm toward the crowd as if they were his jury. A few passengers muttered agreement, but their voices sounded small compared to the quiet anticipation in the room. Maya didn't answer. Her eyes stayed locked on him, steady and unblinking. The credential remained untouched on the table, its silence heavier than all of Kyle's words. Donna shifted again, caught between her training and her conscience. She glanced at Reed, who still hadn't spoken, into his radio. Reed's jaw tightened, his hand resting near the mic, his hesitation stretching long enough to show doubt. The scanners beeped sporadically as other lanes cleared passengers. each sound reminding the crowd that this one remained frozen. The tension coiled tighter, pulling all attention to the small card resting in plain view. Finally, Donna stepped forward, her hand trembling as it reached toward the table. Her fingertips brushed the credential's edge, and the crowd leaned in together, phones lifted higher. Donna's hand hovered for a beat before she finally turned the credential over. The seal caught the fluorescent light, sharp and undeniable. For a moment she forgot to breathe. Her lips parted, barely forming the words that slipped out. "Oh my God!" The crowd pressed forward instinctively, passengers craning necks, phones stretching higher. The camera lenses captured it all. The official insignia, the unmistakable authority stamped into that card. Kyle blinked, his smirk collapsing into confusion, his mouth opening but no sound arriving. Maya didn't move. She didn't need to. The weight of recognition filled the space around her. She wasn't just another traveler, not just a passenger in line. She was the one who oversaw the very system Kyle had abused. The silence deepened, so complete that the buzz of the overhead lights seemed louder than the human voices. Donna straightened suddenly, the reality dawning in her posture. Reed's radio hissed, the dispatcher repeating a request for an update, but Reed didn't answer. His eyes stayed on the card, on the truth now laid bare for everyone to see. Kyle took a step back, his hand still hovering near the inspection slip as if it could shield him from what he'd just provoked. But there was no barrier left. The card on the table had erased all pretense. The crowd didn't cheer, didn't gasp. Their silence was sharper. They were waiting, watching to see what the woman with that credential would say next. Maya's voice cut through the stillness, calm but firm, carrying more weight than any shout could. "Your badge number," she said, her eyes fixed on Kyle. It wasn't a request. It was procedure. Kyle's jaw twitched. "You don't—" "Your badge number," Maya repeated, her tone leaving no room for doubt. The authority in her words belonged to someone who knew the rules not as a traveler, but as the one entrusted to enforce them. Phones zoomed closer. The crowd sensed the shift, the slow turning of power. Donna adjusted her stance, as though pulled into alignment with the authority standing before her. Reed finally pressed his radio, but not to report Maya, only to acknowledge, "Stand by." Kyle's voice dropped, thinner now. "This is my checkpoint. You can't—" Maya didn't flinch. "I can, and I will." She gestured toward the overhead camera, the one mounted just above the scanner. "That has already recorded your conduct. Every word, every shove, every violation of screening protocol." The fluorescent light seemed harsher on Kyle now, exposing the beads of sweat forming along his hairline. His earlier bravado had no footing left. Every excuse collapsed under the clarity of her precision. The crowd didn't need to be told what they were seeing. They could feel the shift in gravity. The man who had barked orders seconds ago now struggling to stand steady under a gaze that made his authority look counterfeit. Maya lifted the credential from the table and held it steady, her voice precise. "I am the FAA inspector assigned to this facility. This lane is under immediate review." Her words weren't loud, but they carried across the checkpoint like a verdict. Donna froze, then shifted her weight, recognizing the authority that outranked her own. Reed straightened instinctively, his hand moving away from the mic. The crowd leaned in closer, phones recording every syllable. Kyle's face went red. "That's not—" Maya didn't let him finish. "Protocol requires your full cooperation. Effective immediately. You are relieved of this lane. Supervisor, you'll reroute passengers and ensure all searches follow the Federal Compliance Manual." Donna hesitated only a second before nodding. "Yes, ma'am," Kyle's voice cracked. "You can't just—" "I can, and I have." She turned her gaze to him, steady as steel. "Badge number, now." The demand left no room for defiance. He stammered, then muttered the digits, his voice trembling under the weight of the cameras. Maya's eyes swept the lane, then lifted to the mounted camera above. "This footage, combined with eyewitness accounts, will be attached to my report. The incident doesn't disappear. It becomes record." Kyle's shoulders sagged, his earlier posture collapsing into something smaller. Around him, the silence of the crowd had shifted, no longer passive but heavy with judgment. A murmur rippled through the line as Hector Lim, the senior TSA lead, rushed into view. He scanned the scene quickly, the scattered bins, Kyle's red face, Donna standing rigid beside Maya. His gaze landed on the credential in Maya's hand, and his expression shifted at once from confusion to recognition. Maya didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "This lane is suspended until further notice," she said. Her tone measured, leaving no doubt it was an order. Donna moved swiftly, unclipping the stanchions to reroute passengers. Reed stepped back, directing the crowd into neighboring lanes. The process looked almost ordinary, but the silence beneath it made it extraordinary. Every passenger understood this wasn't a delay. It was discipline unfolding in real time. Kyle opened his mouth, but Hector's hand cut the air. "Step aside, Mercer." His words were sharp, final. Kyle hesitated, then obeyed, his footsteps heavy as he retreated toward the wall. Maya noted the details calmly, pulling a small notepad from her bag. She wrote without hurry, each stroke of the pen deliberate, knowing every move was being filmed. The crowd followed her hand like it was a gavel marking history. She looked up only once, eyes steady. "One final step remains before I close this report." The words weren't loud, but the silence that followed turned them into thunder. Every lens pointed closer, every passenger holding their breath, waiting to witness what that final step would be. The checkpoint had become a stage, and every passenger in line was part of the audience. Phones hovered like lanterns, their screens glowing blue against faces drawn tight with anticipation. No one shuffled forward, no one coughed or complained. Even the rolling wheels of carry-ons seemed to have quieted. Lena zoomed closer, capturing Maya's steady expression as she documented names and badge numbers. Each stroke of her pen was a declaration, a reminder that this wasn't just a moment, it was evidence. Whispers carried from the back of the line. "She's shutting it all down," someone said, the words repeated in awe by a stranger nearby. The statement rippled forward, until even those at the front were murmuring it like a truth already sealed. Kyle stood against the wall, pale now, the smugness drained from his face. His authority had evaporated, replaced by the unmistakable presence of accountability. Every time his eyes darted toward the cameras, his shoulders seemed to sag further. Maya glanced up once at the sea of phones aimed at her, not to seek validation but to acknowledge what was already happening. This was no longer a private exchange. It had become a public reckoning, witnessed and preserved. When she lowered her gaze back to the report in her hands, the silence held firm. The passengers were waiting, not to board their flights, but to see how justice would land. Maya closed her notebook, the sound crisp in the silence. She turned to Hector Lim, her words clear, deliberate. "This lane is shut down for retraining, effective immediately." Hector gave a short nod. "Understood." His voice carried the weight of someone who recognized her authority and knew there was no debating it. Donna moved quickly, unclipping stanchions to funnel travelers toward the neighboring checkpoint. The passengers obeyed, quiet but alert, their eyes lingering on Maya as they filed past. Kyle didn't move until Hector's hand gestured firmly toward the side wall. His face was ashen now, his earlier bravado stripped bare. The shuffle of his shoes against tile sounded louder than the announcements overhead. Travelers watched as he was escorted from the lane, no longer an enforcer, but a subject of review. Jamal Pierce, the businessman who had muttered impatience earlier, stood frozen near the exit. He didn't check his watch this time. His eyes stayed fixed on Kyle, disbelief etched into his face. What he saw wasn't delay, it was consequence. Maya remained steady in the middle of the space, her presence anchoring the room. The authority she carried wasn't loud, wasn't flashy. It was measured, undeniable, and public. The cameras captured it all, ensuring the removal couldn't be undone or forgotten. The crowd dispersed slowly, not with the hurried relief of travelers cleared to board, but with the quiet weight of witnesses leaving a courtroom. Conversations rose in pockets, subdued but certain. Words like protocol, power, and justice threaded through the air, fragments caught by microphones hidden in phones still recording. Lena lowered her camera at last, her face thoughtful. She hadn't just filmed a shove or an argument. She had filmed an entire system being checked in real time. The video would spread before the day ended. Everyone in the room seemed to know it. Donna approached Maya with careful steps. Her voice was low, almost swallowed by the surrounding noise. "I'm sorry," she said, eyes avoiding direct contact. It wasn't loud enough for the whole line to hear, but one of the phones caught it anyway. The apology wasn't for Maya alone. It was for the lens, for the record, for anyone who would watch. Reed adjusted his stance near the podium, relief settling across his shoulders. For once, the silence of his radio didn't feel like hesitation. It felt like safety. At the edge of the concourse, Kyle sat in a chair against the wall, hands clasped, eyes down. The uniform that once gave him power now marked him for scrutiny. And the checkpoint, though quieter, felt changed. Not just managed, but corrected. Maya stood at the center of the quieted lane, watching as order returned. Passengers moved through the redirected lines with the hesitance of people who had just witnessed something they would not forget. Her voice, when it came, wasn't raised for show. It was steady, clear, meant for the record as much as the crowd. Authority exists to protect, not to humiliate, she said. When that balance is broken, safety is lost. Her words carried into the microphones of waiting phones, carried further than the walls of the checkpoint. She tucked the credential back into her blazer, her movements unhurried. Around her, travelers nodded silently, as if agreeing with a truth too obvious to contest. Donna kept her eyes lowered. Reed kept his stance firm, and Hector oversaw the adjustments with measured care. The performance was over. This was consequence codified in front of witnesses. A father lifted his daughter by the stanchion, whispering reassurance that the line was safe again. Maya's gaze softened, just briefly, before she turned toward the exit. Because silence at checkpoints is not safety. It is compliance with abuse. And that is why we say, share your story, comment if you've faced injustice, and subscribe to join our community of justice and change. The lane reopened, but its echo carried, a reminder that some rules exist to protect and others must be rewritten.